We struggled with this, I think, because nobody, like both myself and Thomas are working on a kinetic launch idea, and we didn't want to just use this as a place to shill. So we tried to think of a way we could recommend something that would positively affect the price of launch in a way that didn't pick like a winner or a technology in particular. And I believe you actually mentioned the spaceport company, and there's a thesis that's going around that I think is rather compelling, which is that there are 4 places in the continental United States where, including Alaska, where you can conduct orbital launch from, and they are all 60 years old, they're all Cold War infrastructure, and they are somewhat impacted and expensive. And that a policy recommendation that could be made, which could have a broad positive impact on the price of launch, would be to simply make these places more available, lower the congestion of the ones which exist. And that would include a process of attempting to, I think on the order of about 15 different companies and locations across the United States have attempted to license themselves for orbital launch and have failed. If somebody calls themselves a spaceport, but they're not one of the big 4, they're really suborbital. So trying to help those guys out, encouraging them to go for it, I think is a good idea and could broadly affect the price of launch sector-wide without like saying like, let's put all our chips on SpaceX or Longshot or whatever, just leave that alone. And we thought that that was cool, but also pretty boring. So we came up with 2 ideas for things that we could do, because we ended up talking about I think we got on the topic of kind of like how crazy it was that Bob was talking about earlier, how big NASA's budget was compared to what it is today. And if you were going to drive attention and money in that direction, what would do it? And my thesis on why NASA's budget was so high during the Apollo program was...
It's the same now.
Well, of course, but you're not taking inflation into account.
Yeah, what about a
No, taking inflation into account.
percentage of GDP?
Percentage?
No, the percentage of GDP was higher, but that's because the GDP was lower.
Well,
in absolute inflation-adjusted
Right.
dollars, NASA's average budget from 61 to 73 in today's money is $22 billion, is the same as NASA's current
What was the
budget.
salary of an aerospace engineer? Like purchasing price parity, NASA had a lot more to throw around at the time.
No.
Inflation should take that into account.
Yeah,
All right.
take that into account.
But Bob, I submit. You are right. I'm wrong. All
This
right.
was a small tangent anyway.
Yeah, small tangent. The idea is basically attempt to drive panic, and if you were going to use a small amount of money to make America extremely panicked, what would you do? So we thought use ChatGPT and a very basically a small writing, like a little bit of maybe like $500 worth of writing help to write a screenplay for a movie in which a small feature, it doesn't matter what the movie is, in that movie feature the first man and woman on the surface of Mars are a Chinese mission. Just feature that, 5 minutes. Let's just show that. It could be a romantic comedy. Just drop that in there somewhere. That's it. Just as a way to just put that out there in the public consciousness and show America this is a real possibility if you don't do something. And I think that Sputnik kind of performed that function in the 1960s. And so that is, I think, the wacky idea. The much realer idea, I think that if you were to look at a country that probably is one of the best right now in the world in terms of regulating launch sites, that it would actually be New Zealand, because they effectively iterated off of America's formula and then simplified things quite a bit. So the idea would be use a $3,000 grant to effectively send Thomas to do some interviews in New Zealand and write a piece. Oh, your thoughts?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but so what actually happened in New Zealand was they ultimately weren't able to launch, and so they're completely umbrellaed under the FAA. So what they did was draw a circle around America that went, and that's the answer.
That sucks so hard. Never mind, forget about that one.
It got solved at the treaty level. That's how it got solved. So it was blocked by the US under all the usual non-proliferation treaties, and so they created an entire new treaty in New Zealand which involves some horse trading, in particular that the propulsion system be built in the United States.
What horseshit. What absolute horseshit.
So you're saying that effectively New Zealand, for that purpose, is
Americans
a subset,
Yeah.
State in America. I
Never
love
mind.
that.
Yeah, there's upsides, for us.
I'm surprised they accepted
It's
that.
so much easier to move to New Zealand.
So, anyways, well, that's depressing. So I guess the ChatGPT movie ideas.
Yeah, right.
Do you guys have any thoughts you'd like to add?
Well, I think the task that we set for ourselves is how do we beat SpaceX at their own game, which is kind of difficult. And I think we've got 3 engineers that started thinking about engineering tasks and where are all the costs of launch. And we had ideas around energy, but that's probably the most minor cost and a little bit speculative and farther out there. But what was one of the areas that we could make progress that would again affect all technologies, whether they're kinetic, chemical rocket, and compliance felt like one of the more tractable ones, I think.
Just you have to push paperwork around, not atoms. So in some ways it feels more tractable. I actually suspect it's not, though.
I didn't realize I was on a team with 2 different kinetic launch
Yeah.
technologies. We've got compressed air over here and rail guns on this side.
Yeah,
and,
for the record,
with different challenges.
I do think I could do something better than SpaceX, and I think there's no reason to do this unless you believe that. So whether or not you think I'm insane, that is at least must be a starting condition for trying to do something along these lines. Shall we move on to questions? Thomas, would you like to add anything? Okay.
Thanks.
Yay!
Okay, questions. Maybe I'll just go around with this
I don't
one.
think I cursed once.
Yeah. Also, the series that you're proposing sounds a bit like For All Mankind.
Yeah, I was
That
just
was
thinking,
mentioned as well,
we
yeah.
mentioned that, but we just thought something modern, something that felt now, not
Okay.
hypothetical
Yeah.
past.
Can't be the Russians anymore.
They probably already made that film in China, right?
I was actually thinking getting a Chinese producer to support it would actually probably be the easiest way to get the money.
So that was.
You can always make it one of those cheap Chinese American co-production films.
Oh,
like
yes.
But that's not going to have the
Sorry,
the
okay,
impact.
question.
That was another point. It's got to be big
Okay.
as this.
I totally agree about the fact that the spaceport supply is jammed up in the United States right now. Canaveral and Vandenberg are pretty much close to capacity under their current system of operation. And recently, a Space Force general said we're going to start looking at launching into low inclination orbits from Vandenberg, which means flying over the mainland U.S. on the way to orbit.
All for it.
Which the Russians and Chinese have been doing right from the beginning.
Yep.
Although it's only Kazakhs and Uyghurs underneath, so they don't really care.
I don't think a
But,
single Kazakh has ever eaten it.
yes. Anyway,
Just the buildings.
right now what we have
Chinese
is
are another issue.
yeah. Right now what we have is a couple of federal ranges, a couple of state projects like Kodiak and Spaceport America, and a bunch of county economic development authorities that had an old SAC base and no idea what to do with it, so they call it spaceports. This is not a national spaceport system, but we need a national spaceport system the same way we have a national airport system, which means right now I'm PI on a project to look at turning an airport into a spaceport. They could support some air launch stuff. It's not optimal right now, but if we had inland launch done under a sensible regulatory regime. In other words, say, look at the density of population underneath your path to orbit, look at the type of spacecraft you're launching and its demonstrated ability to control, i.e. Falcon or even Blue Origin's New Shepard, have demonstrated their ability to do propulsive landings, allow them to launch over land under a certain amount of population density, of which the United States has a large supply. Most of Texas, for instance.
Nevada?
And all of New Mexico, pretty much. So a national spaceport system would also have a prearranged system and protocols for making those available for national security launches in times of emergency or near peer attacks, because I think the day we can say, Canaveral and Vandenberg are immune to hostile action is, long past.
Yes.
Just imagine if the September 11th airplane had gone through the VAB at Canaveral rather than the World Trade Center. That would have put a bit of a setback. So I'm just saying. What?
It'd be a way to get a new VAB.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, thumbs up 100% on what you've said, but let's look at an actual national spaceport system that could be a Civil Reserve spaceport
Yeah,
system.
my,
in
my
times of
instinct on
emergency.
that is that if something like that is going to happen, it will be driven by the Department of Defense almost entirely, and that I have a philosophy towards legislation more broadly, which is that there must be some kind of a forcing function,
Yep.
and that either has to be an enormous expenditure of lobbying dollars or like real national need. And I think that this is a problem broadly across the sector, and that like we're kind of trying to lead the world to some degree, but
Just make one more bit of experience. I'm also PI right now on a FAA master plan update for an airport that wants to be a spaceport. And we put this in, we put a whole detailed airport layout plan, including space facilities, and sent it to the FAA. And they came back and said, we are astonished and frankly kind of afraid that you're actually taking this commercial space stuff seriously because we have no idea of how to deal with it.
of course.
We have no idea of how to fit this into the FAA guidelines for approving expenditure at an airport. We have no idea of how to do a forecast of launch use that would.
Literally just have to make them.
We are making it by applying.
Is this for Puerto Rico?
No.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, so, okay, so what would you think instead about a movie about a Bond villain who has these networks of giant cannons that he's put around the world, supposedly for humanitarian purposes, launching
But it's pointed-
spacecraft, but
I think if I pointed at Tel Aviv, I'm almost guaranteed to get taken out. I think that's likely to happen. I think they did actually make a biopic of Gerald Bull in the 2000s, I think. It was supposedly not very good.
Please stop.
Yes, please.
All right, any more questions?
Yes, we had one from Creon over here.
I'm sorry, buddy.
Maybe this is a topic for offline, I don't know, but how does kinetic launch change what you're talking about? I don't mean like how does it change the economics? I mean, aren't these kinetic systems more restrictive in terms of where
Where you can place them?
and where they go?
Yes,
Okay.
both is true. So it's basically you're trading some constraints on the reason I argued yesterday effectively that one of the reasons rockets succeeded is because they're very flexible on the ground, and they barely work. Right, they deliver a very small fraction to orbit. They fail a lot. They're a Fabergé egg, but they're a Fabergé egg that comes with some significant flexibility. You can launch from multiple different places in different directions. You don't have that luxury with a kinetic launch system. The kinetic launch system is extremely low marginal cost of launch. That is the fundamental trade-off there. So I really believe actually that one of the primary reasons no one has built a kinetic launch system doesn't emerge from the technology. I think it's really been around since the 1960s. To do it, I believe that it is actually this issue of political economy and real estate. You have to find someone who is prepared to let you build one. And I actually think that that is possibly the core challenge of the whole thing. And I actually believe with relatively high certainty that it would be impossible to build one within the continental United States. I do not think it could be done. I could be proven wrong. I would love to be proven wrong. But I do not think that it can happen. I think it has to happen outside of America. And that breaks my heart in a way, but I think that's probably true.
From a noise perspective, nothing else?
From a large novelty perspective, imagine the environmental impact review I would have to go through. I have seriously talked to Indian reservations because they are in many ways de facto independent countries. Many federal agencies have no jurisdiction there, and they have a lot of land in the middle of nowhere. But it's very difficult in the United States. The second you hit 500 feet, you run back into the FAA, and the FAA barely knows how to regulate rockets. If you come to them with something that is fundamentally new, you could be tied up for a decade trying to get them to agree. And it terrifies me. The technology, I actually think, is relatively simple. So, sorry, that's my take on it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, let's stop.